Welcome to the Nonprofits. For our third segment this week, we're looking at the intersection of Idaho, the King James Bible, and public school children. I think we all know where this is headed. Stephen Harder, please give us the details here.
You bet, Scott. Idaho lawmakers are looking at indoctrinating their children into Christianity in the most boring way possible. The state's House Education Committee recently heard a bill that would require daily Bible reading in all public schools. The proposal, penned by the Idaho Family Policy Center, was introduced by Representative Jordan Redman and presented by Lobby President Blaine Conzatti. If passed, the legislation would see the King James Bible or the New King James Bible read in every occupied classroom in the school district every morning. The passages would be read without comment or interpretation and done so sequentially in such a way that the entire book would be read over 10 years. Conzatti says that the bill has historical merit since the Bible readings were common in schools before the 1960s. Other committee members wonder if this might somehow infringe upon the First Amendment. This story by Laura Guido of the Idaho Press on February 7th, 2025.
All right. Let's buckle up. Let's get rolling on this, Stephen. It's obvious that the end goal here is to try to get children reading the Bible more often and at a younger age. So do you think that's what they're doing? Do you think that's going to be an effective way to encourage that religious belief?
It's not. It's what the what
Don't
is
mix
this?
your words, Stephen. Give it to us straight. We want the straight.
No, for the first 2 minutes, I do need to censor my words. Can we just call this this isn't about? Can you imagine an English teacher say, okay, we're going to be reading To Kill a Mockingbird this year, and we are not going to comment on it. We're not going to discuss it. We're not going to interpret it. We're just going to expose you to it. Don't think about it. Don't talk about it. Don't try to engage in it whatsoever. Just sit there passively and accept this. Can you imagine our public school systems endorsing this, our money going towards supporting this? This is brainwashing, right? This is brainwashing is what this is. Why do we want to brainwash our children into faith? I don't know. But you know what? Honestly, I think that there are some real benefits to this. Does anybody here know just how fucking boring the Bible is? Do we understand? Do we appreciate how incredibly dull this 2,000-year-old or 2,000-year-old Bronze Age sex manual is? There is an entire book called Numbers. Do we know why it's called Numbers? Because it's just numbers. That's all
you're
that
talking
it
to a math
is.
teacher here, man. So watch it. You're treading on thin ice there.
I've got
Listen,
nothing
there's fun numbers. There's 77. There's 69. So there's some fun numbers out there, everybody.
They are not in the book of Numbers. This is a perfect way of exposing all Idaho children to just how boring the Bible is. And I really like the idea of children learning to just endure this. No one takes pleasure in this. No one likes this, but we just gotta put up with it. I think that would bring, and especially the King James version. I don't.
Could this be considered cruel and unusual punishment? I've read the King James version. It's hard to read.
Is it hard to read? I haven't noticed because I've hardly been exposed to it. I spent 7 years in Bible college. I hardly brushed up against the King James version because it just didn't make sense in my sphere, in my bubble, to be exposing ourselves to a version of the Bible that didn't make sense. And they want to make children sit through it. There would be spending 7 days on Song of Psalms, and more than a week, having grade 3 years olds listening to how her breasts are
sequentially. They got to go sequentially. They can't move that to different time. Yeah.
No, No, crushing the baby's skulls. And let's talk about Lot's daughters with kindergarten students. That sounds like a great idea. So, yeah, I think that there are definitely unintentional benefits to having this pass.
Interesting.
I just want to hear a little Timothy go. What does that mean to lay with his daughters? Like that's what I want. Little Timmy asking that question to his teacher that has to read this fucking book.
I'm picturing faculty development activities where they teach teachers how to deflect questions, right? Well, Helen, since you're talking here, let's jump down to you here. So opponents of this bill are claiming that there is a clear constitutional conflict here. Can you explain to us what that conflict entails?
Establishment clause, everybody. Establishment clause. Because guess what? You're not supposed to be talking about religion in a super special context in public schools unless it's for educational purposes. Okay, so everybody, if we're going to do this, we're going to read the Quran, we're going to read the Torah, we're going to read the Bhagavad Gita, we're going to read Richard Buckland, which is a pagan book about pagan rituals in schools, because guess what? We cannot have just one super special book being taught to children in schools. But guess what? It's for some reason this keeps happening, and I want to point out there were past decisions to keep Bibles out of school. So in 1963, Abington School District versus Shemp, the state-sponsored Bible readings violated the First Amendment and what's known as the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which prevents the government from establishing a religion. That case applied a view of Constitution known as the wall of separation between the church and the state. University of Idaho law professor Richard Seaman told the Idaho Press Seaman specializes in constitutional law. So this has been going on since the 1960s and the 1970s. Okay, people, listen, it's all in our lifetimes. Okay, stop, just stop trying to make religion as part of the state. Now, I took a world religions class. I even went to Catholic school, and guess what? I learned science at Catholic school. So, point one for my Catholic school, but also terrible. Catholics are terrible, but at least I learned science. Now, but theology was understood as a separate class versus a science class, okay? But my parents specifically sent me to Catholic school so that I would be brought up within our religion. This was not a public school space. Let's keep that in mind. If you want your children to learn religion, send them to a religious school. But here's the problem, and here's the rub. The more that the cost of things go up, the more that religious families cannot homeschool their kids or send them to a private institution, more and more of this is going to make its way into public spaces. And guess what? We pay taxes. You have parent choice too, which we'll talk about in the next segment. You have parent choice too to be like, guess what? As a parent, I don't want this a part of public education.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting that Stephen was talking about maybe this is going to be backfiring, and then here we have Helen. You're a perfect example of somebody you went to a Catholic school, and obviously, I think I'm going out on a limb here saying that you're not a Catholic at this time. Is that am I correct in assuming that?
This is the result of my religious trauma, that I come on the internet and talk about how terrible religion is. Interesting. Okay, well, I want to shift gears slightly a little bit. I want to jump in and hear what Ejector Seat has to say here. EJ, Helen was hinting that this bill is kind of exclusionary in purpose. How broad or narrow is that exclusion, and what are the excluded people to do? I mean, what's the expectation here?
So it's very exclusionary. Like Stephen was saying, it focuses on the King James Version and New King James Version, which if you haven't read KJV,
The Freudian slip there.
It reads a lot like Shakespeare, just with none of the thought put in. It's very hard to read. And the fact that they're using the KJV speaks to the fact that it also discriminates to those outside of Christianity and those inside who aren't KJV only Protestants, which is most Christians. The biggest group of Christians are Catholics. So they're also discriminating against most Christians who don't recognize the KJV as a legitimate translation.
You can just keep saying KGB and we'll know what you mean.
Yeah. We're going to confuse the Russians watching this. To get out of this, you need a written slip from your parents. So by default, it's going to get read unless your parents say no, which is a very bad idea. Because I know not a lot of people that are involved in this bill might not understand it, but there is a thing called consent. And they should probably read up on how it works. Now,
you would think, yes.
Yeah. Quick quote. State legislatures have had the primary authority for shaping the school curriculum and education standards, and there is no need to give equal time to every competing religious, historical, or library text. So he wants just to be presented as Christianity,
right?
Which is unconstitutional as fuck. I'm outside of the US, and I can tell you that.
Right.
So I'm wondering what he's thinking. No, the bill is being opposed. As mentioned before, it's being opposed by people like Jack Nelson. So that is a good thing. And we also have in our favour that past rulings like Abington School District versus Shemp disallow this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I want to jump back to Stephen real quick here, and I want to Stephen. One of the arguments that they're using here is a common claim among American Christians, at least, that there's this historical precedence, right? That it's part of our history, and so then it takes priority over religious freedom, which is actually written specifically in the Constitution. Do you think that kind of argument holds water? Do you think that's a reasonable argument that we should be paying attention to?
Well, Scott, do you know what else there's historical precedence for? Things like slavery. Did you know that there was slavery back when the founding fathers were writing up their little document, and there was racism and there was sexism, there's colonialism, all these things there's historical precedence for these things, Scott. That doesn't mean that they are the be all and end all. That doesn't mean that we need to be aspiring to encapsulate them here in our present day. I think we can grow, we can evolve, we can move beyond these things that they had their place in history. Absolutely. We didn't understand the world, so we looked to superstition to fill in those gaps to make us feel better, and there were benefits to that for a lot of people, for sure, but we've outgrown them, and it is wrong for us to say, well, the only people who want the halcyon days of the 50s are the old, white, entitled rich men who missed the days when their opinion mattered just because of who they were, not because of the status, not because of the content of their brain, the content of their character, but because of their appearance on the outside and how much money they had and how wealthy they were. That's when they really mattered, and they missed those days, and they would love to recapture them. And I understand why, and we won't allow it.
So you're saying that maybe it's kind of like the naturalistic fallacy, right? The naturalistic fallacy says just because something is natural doesn't mean it's necessarily good, right? So here we might have something called the historical fallacy, that just because a philosophy or an idealism or an ideology, that's the word I was looking for, just because there's a historical precedence or some kind of historical significance to that concept, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's something that's desirable. That's something that we'd want to, you would think that we could, that just like a human being can grow up and mature and leave childish things behind, right? That's my favorite Bible verse, by the way. When I was a child, I thought as a child, I acted as a child, I spoke as a child. And then when I grew up, I left all that childish shit behind, right? And so, so you would think that what's that?
Was that in the KGB version?
That is a direct quote from the KGB. Yes, right. EJ, do you have anything to add on to what what Stephen was saying about that? I mean, we're talking about just because it's historical doesn't mean that it was good. And I would imagine that a European might be able to shed a little bit of light on that. What do you think?
So the whole "if it was historical, it must be a good" thing is seeing a lot of heat over here in Europe right now. That was what the special military operation in Ukraine was about. Unfortunately, if the people who were legislating this bill were to really think about that concept, it would mean that they don't support their current government at all. And whenever they want to push it back, it either means what they're talking about is that we should all move back to Africa where we first evolved out of, or maybe they support British rule of America. But I imagine what they really mean is that they want power and they don't want anyone else taking it from them, because as Stephen said, when you have power and privilege and everyone else wants equality, when they start coming up to you, it looks like you're going down to them.
Hear, 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 hear. Helen, I want to jump down to you real quick here. So despite our so-called separation of religion and government, the U.S. really is a majority Christian nation, right? Most more than half of Americans are Christians. So in your opinion, Helen, does this legislation represent a shift in the desires of American people, or is it due to a rather vocal minority of religious extremists? I mean, is it somebody kind of riding on the backs of the majority, or is this actually something that the majority wants?
I think this is politics wrapped as religion, because there are groups like Christians Against Christian Nationalism that don't want the separation of church and state to remain intact. There's plenty of religious people that do not want to see us become a theocracy. We have to keep that in mind, because the squeaky wheel is getting the oil right now. And that's what's really happening. And because, yes, there is a vocal minority, and they're super powerful, because guess what? They have power and money. That is what we have people that have power and money, and they've been playing this long game since the 1950s. This is not a new development, people. This has been going on a very long time. I keep saying this every time I'm on the show, and I have to keep hammering it home that this has been a long game. And we're seeing the fruits of that long game now starting to reap. And they are plucking, and they're like, okay, like, my fruit has grown. Guess what? I get to take from the tree of knowledge. I get to have all the power. That is what we're seeing the results of. And they started by infiltrating government, and now they're pushing it into the schools. That is the result of what we're actually seeing happen. But guess what? The majority, even if they're religious, don't really want this, because they can understand that their children can go to school and learn science and math and geology and all the things. And also on Sundays, go to church with their families on Sundays, pray at night, celebrate their holidays, and also realize that religion is a private thing. Because guess what? You're supposed to have like a prayer closet, everybody. Like, this is not supposed to be something that you're shouting from the rooftops in their own fucking book. So guess what? You don't get to do this just because you think that your super special God is super special. You're like, my imaginary friend is so great. No, we don't get to do this anymore. So we have to keep that in mind. And those of us that are on this side, we're on the skeptical atheist side, have to align with religious people that want that separation. They are, because they're holding that value, and we have to align with them. And I get it. It's hard. You can disagree about theology, but if your values align, that's where we have to be aligned.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I did this in an earlier segment, and I want to do it again. So I appreciate the tolerance of the panelists here, but I like bringing up user comments. I like getting the everyman voice into this. And so here's a reader comment that was attached to this article. And I'm going to ask again, like I did before, I'm going to ask each of you to give a kind of a short response to this. So this one was by a user by the name of Daniel Bailey, and Daniel had to say, with quite a bit of usage of caps in this comment here. Daniel said, ignorance.
He's got feelings, Scott. He's got feelings he needs to express through text.
All right. Well, let's see if I can convey that. Ignorance. Even being a Christian, so this is a Christian, my kids would be told that they can get up and leave the classroom until the forced indoctrination is finished. American has no official religion, and the freedom to choose is a constitutionally protected thing. For a party that's so against big government, they sure use nothing but in an attempt to force everyone into their increasingly psychotic ideals. Now that seems to be in favor. That's a Christian perspective that seems to be supporting the separation, because they don't want, and to be honest, that's really part of the foundation of that separation of church and state, is because so that the government cannot dictate how you worship, how you hold your religious beliefs. And so here we are hearing from a Christian who is very vociferously saying that they are against this idea. EJ, what do you think about that? What do you think about this Christian who came forth to stand against other Christians and stand up for what they thought was right?
So I think they're bang on. As Helen pointed out, in the Bible, it says that your belief should be practiced in private because it's not something to show off that you are a good Christian. I think that is bang on. What I was saying earlier about how this discriminates against any non-KJV Christian.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it right there. Yeah.
He's not only is this person disagreeing with the bill itself, but he also recognizes it as the forced indoctrination, and that America has no official religion, as he puts it.
Right. Yet,
and hopefully never.
Right.
Because people forget that America is founded on secularity. Right. Even Thomas Jefferson agreed on that. And he's been dead God knows how many hundreds of years.
So he must be right? Well, he was there. He was there when it all went down. So you would think he would know. You would think he would know.
Well, he was in France, but yeah.
All right, Stephen, what's your take on Daniel's comments here?
I think he is one of those wishy-washy Catholics who doesn't actually take the word of God seriously. I think if he was a real Christian, he would be all for this. It's like whatever. You'll have Christians of every stripe and color, and some of them are going to, like, for me, I was hardcore in my fundamentalism, and so this would be just the mark of someone who doesn't really take God seriously. Maybe one day he will, but if you really valued God's word, you would. And the framing of this idea isn't we're going to convert people to our religion. It's like we need to appreciate the Bible because it has historical relevance to our country, and we are losing that. And it's a unifying quality, all that bullshit. So yeah, you'll find people of every persuasion, but yeah, for me, this wouldn't hold any weight for me back in the day because you know what, I know better.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so ejector seat was thinking it was a good thing. Stephen's a little bit more cynical of this commenter. Helen, what are your thoughts on Daniel's comments here?
I'm kind of in the middle of both.
Okay.
Because I am, as much as I rally against ambiguity, I'm also I have a very top-down perspective of a lot of things, and things are very nuanced. Obviously, I want to be aligned with people that hold my values, but also on the other side, it's like, dude, put your money where your mouth is. Right. If you really believe this, you will want to stand up and say, my faith is the best faith, and, want it to become part of the state. But also at the same time, there are plenty of religious groups that are against having any sort of theocracy. So it's complicated.
Right.
It's complicated, especially as someone that works with recovering from religion. I, works with the ACA, been doing this a while as an atheist activist. I see the damage that religion does. And this is a part of that, but also I want to be aligned with people that hold my values, that don't want to see this become a theocracy. And that means aligning with people that are religious. It's complicated. All of this is very complicated and nuanced, and I don't have the answer. But if we are going to fight against fascism, we have to align with people that also hold our values, even though it might go against some of them. It's like, figure out what beast you want to fight.
If we want to get shit done, we're going to have to work together, right? I do think that I kind of agree with each of you a little bit. I think that if we look at this as more of a baby step, or the cracks are starting to show in the dam here, I think that if we're going to see any kind of meaningful resistance against what's happening here, it's going to, like we said before, there's a majority of Christians in the United States. And so if we want to make any progress on this ideal of the separation of church and state, which is good for both church and state, if we do want to see that being upheld, we do need to I don't know if courting would be the nice word, the right word here, but we do need to, there needs to be some effort coming from the religious side of things. And it can't just be, atheist groups and things like that, because we're a minority, and we're fairly, maybe not easily dismissed, but we're easily ignored, I suppose. That might be something to say. So as we're gaining power, we'll get a little bit more voice. But until then, I don't know. I think we need to take take baby steps into the right direction. Who knows what? So great discussion here. Thank you all for participating. If you out there want to see more of what we have to say about various topics, then you can just follow these links.